Here I am in Frankfort, Kentucky, in front of the state capitol. As you can see, the seasons are quickly changing. Fall is giving way to winter. And just like in 2016, we saw some major political changes, seasonal changes, if you will, on the political landscape. Outside, businessman Matt Bevin from Louisville won an unexpected victory to become Kentucky's 62nd governor. Join me as we sit down with Governor Bevin to talk about some of these changes and challenges that he faced in 2016.
A Year in Review with Kentucky Governor Matt Bevin, brought to you by the Commonwealth Policy Center, hosted by Executive Director Richard Nelson.
It was probably a year ago when I interviewed you before the primary. Made it through there by 83 votes, one of the closest primary elections we've seen in Kentucky. And then, of course, in the general election, you made it through there. Really defied the polls, defied the pundits and detractors, and won by a huge margin of victory. And I got to know you a little bit on the campaign trail. We crossed paths and saw each other. I got to hear you speak and, of course, interviewed you here and there. But tell me, what's it like to go from the campaign trail, running for office, and you had some great ideas that you shared, a vision for Kentucky, and now you're in office. It's been a year. Is it everything that you've expected?
And then some. And that's both good and bad. I expected it would be bureaucratic and political and slow-moving, and it has been all that. And yet, for me, the greatest joy, to the extent that I find joy in the job, and I certainly try to, it is rewarding. It is very rewarding to be in a position of influence, to have been entrusted with an ability to shepherd an entire state. You know, the Commonwealth of Kentucky, we're fairly diverse in many respects, but homogeneous in a number of others. And to be entrusted by this populace to lead this state forward is an incredible honor. And while it has not been simple, especially with one arm tied behind our back in the first year legislatively, nonetheless, we've gotten an amazing number of good things accomplished, and I'm grateful for that.
You really have, and I recall when you were on the campaign trail, you had prepared what was called the Blueprint for a Better Kentucky.
Yes.
It was an ambitious plan of how we can become, as you've said, the best version of ourselves, how we could improve policies, procedures, laws that could be enacted to make Kentucky more competitive. And several of those things that you did lay out in that plan, you've actually enacted in your first year. I'd like to touch on some of the milestones, if you will. Pension reform. This has been an issue dogging Kentucky for years. There's been a lot of talk about how to do it. Very little action has been done, but you did make a promise on the campaign trail. When you got into office, you made some significant changes there in your State of the Budget address. You proposed some changes where you were going to take millions of dollars and put it into this budget, which is now the worst in the country, into the state pension fund that is. Last year was about $36 billion in unfunded mandates. Tell us about that pension reform and shoring it up to make it more solvent.
Sure. I would love to tell you that we've solved the problem. We've not. We've just begun. But you can't climb out of a hole if you're still digging downward. And so the first thing you got to do is stop digging. And indeed, we did pass the most fiscally responsible budget probably in the history of Kentucky, certainly in our lifetimes. We put more money, we put $1.2 billion into the pension system, more money than has ever been put in. And yet, it only stems the bleeding. It hasn't even fully stopped. We've got, as a state, to get our financial house in order. So there will be comprehensive pension reform coming, even far beyond the stopping of the bleeding that we have done. That's something that will be done in 2017 and beyond of necessity. So there will be pension reform and there will be tax reform, and those two will be joined at the hip. And there will be many other things too that we can talk about as we move forward in this conversation. But the year of 2017 and beyond is the beginning of a very new and exciting and bright day for Kentucky.
It certainly is, and I want to go back to the budget address. Back in January of last year, almost a year ago, you made several proposals, pension reform, of course, but one of the things was across-the-board budget cuts, significant budget cuts, not in every area. Education, you left that alone. Law enforcement, didn't touch that. Transportation workers, in fact, you gave them raises. Was that a hard thing to do, to come into office and to say to state employees, and we rely on state employees, many of them do a good job, and it's important work that they're doing. Was that tough to make those cuts coming in?
It wasn't, because it was the responsible thing to do. It's never fun. No one wants to be the person who comes in and cuts the budget. We didn't cut staff. We didn't cut bodies. We've basically, through attrition, people retiring or moving and leaving, we've just not backfilled certain positions. But we didn't let people go. We simply just said we are going to budget in the next years 9% less dollars, so 9 cents out of a dollar less than we did in the previous 2 years, and we're going to put the onus on each of the respective departments and cabinets to find those savings, find those efficiencies. And while it hasn't been simple or easy or fun, it's been important, it's been necessary, and the end result is good, and it proves the fact that fiscal responsibility, being good stewards of the taxpayers' money, is what's expected, it's what's demanded, and as we saw in the most recent election, it's what's rewarded at the ballot box.
That's right. Another major area of change is Medicaid. You initiated a program called Health, and this is where you have built-in incentives for those who rely on the Medicaid program. You have built-in incentives for them to live healthier lives, yes. In particular. Could you expand on that?
Sure. The short version of it is that people that are engaged tend to be healthier. If someone has no vested interest in their health outcomes, they have no engagement in the process, they're not as likely to be healthy. And so what we've simply said is if you're going to be especially an able-bodied working-age man or woman, you have no reason to expect that you should not be involved in your own health outcomes. Simply taking taxpayer money, providing Medicaid cards to people, and thinking we've solved their health issues is delusional. It's very faulty thinking. And so my argument has been, and that of our administration as we've put forward this waiver request, is to engage people, to have them have a vested interest, skin in the game, to take smoking cessation classes and be rewarded, to take financial literacy courses for that and be rewarded, to be able to volunteer in their community, to work and or train for jobs that actually exist in their community, to be engaged. That's the operative word, to be engaged in their community, because engaged people tend to be healthier people. There's no question. No study has ever shown opposite. So that is what we're trying to do, is re-engage people in helping to determine their own health outcomes.
Do you think when people take ownership in their own decisions, like healthcare, health outcomes, their own retirement planning, things of that nature, does that make for a stronger country? Some would say, well, there's this perception, Governor Bevin, that the Republicans are in charge, they're all Grinches, they just want to grab what they can get and let other people fend for themselves. Now that is a perception, doesn't mean I agree with it, but what I'm seeing and hearing from you is something different.
It's the exact opposite. And in fact, that false narrative that you have described, which has been painted by those who are of a much more liberal ideology, has been painted as a smokescreen, and they hope that, in fact, that Republicans would live down to that false narrative. And in fact, the opposite has been the case. It is liberals and liberal Democrats in particular who in recent years have done exactly that. They've held incredibly large and larger proportions of our society captive to being dependent on government welfare and government benefits, to the detriment of themselves. Because the missing ingredient, Richard, is this: there is dignity that comes from being someone engaged in your own health outcomes or your own ability to provide for yourself. There's dignity in work. When Thomas Jefferson talked about creating virtuous citizens by using taxpayer dollars to help with public education, he wasn't talking about goody-goodies or the next person who was going to be a preacher or what have you. A virtuous citizen was somebody, because work is a virtue, that is engaged, is contributing to society, that is an integral part of their communities. That was the virtue. There's dignity in that. And if you rob an individual, a man or a woman, of the dignity associated with helping themselves, You've robbed them ultimately of hope. People that are hopeless are robbed of their humanity. People who have been robbed of their humanity, they make inhumane decisions about themselves, their own bodies, those around them, their own families, and their communities. And society loses. That's why it's important to empower the individual with the dignity and the hope that comes from being engaged.
Very good, very good. I want to move on. We've got many issues to talk about. We could talk about that last one for the rest of the time, but red tape reduction initiative. There are over 4,700 administrative regulations on the books. Many of these are outdated. Yes. You put together a task force to look at those outdated, outmoded regulations. How can we make it more efficient? How can we make it easier for business people in Kentucky? Bring us up to speed on that. How is that going?
It's going great. It really is. I tell you, if you want to talk about an issue that appeals to people no matter their ideology, liberals want less red tape, conservatives want less red tape, Republicans, Democrats, doesn't matter. Men, women, young and old, everybody wants less red tape. And this little pin that I wear is a pair of scissors cutting through the red tape, and you see these on the lapels of a number of people in our administration. We've committed to cutting 30% of all the red tape in Kentucky in the next 3 years. That's an audacious goal. But already we've cut hundreds of pieces of unneeded, duplicative, and outdated, redundant pieces of regulation, and we have many more to accomplish. So that is going well. It's been embraced by people far and wide. I would encourage your viewers, go to redtapereduction.com. That's redtapereduction.com, and give us your ideas. We want them from everybody, business community, non-business community.
That's great. You're obviously making some great strides here in Frankfort. Some would say that you're changing the culture of Frankfort. We saw a historic election that swept a supermajority into our state house. This is the first time in 95 years that they have been in the majority there. There's a supermajority in the state Senate. It looks like, from what I'm hearing, fiscal issues are going to be of primary importance coming into the 2017 session. But what about social issues? And I want to pivot to pro-life laws and some of what you have done. You signed the first pro-life bill into law last year. I happened to have the honor to be there, and I was very pleased to see that. That was the informed consent bill. Yes. We also saw some other pro-life things happen. There was an abortion clinic in Lexington illegally operating for years, apparently had not received the proper oversight from the Department of Health and Family Services. Planned Parenthood facility, new facility, tried to open up in Louisville without the proper paperwork, and your agency put a halt to that. I'm curious, why is life an important issue to you, Governor Bevin? Why? Obviously, these are pro-life moves, but why is this an important issue?
We wouldn't be sitting here if someone had not valued our lives. The fact that our founders recognized very appropriately that government does not dictate the importance of or significance of or value of someone's life, but that rather that was endowed within us by our Creator. It is an inalienable right. And that right to life, as was recognized by our founders, is something that I recognize. And I'm grateful that my mother valued my life and brought me into this world. And I'm grateful for those who've contributed to my development along the way. But it is incumbent upon those in government to protect the most vulnerable among our population at both ends of the life spectrum, including unborn children. And so I happen to be very strongly and unapologetically pro-life. I know that not everyone is, but I will do everything within my power, within the confines of the existing law, to ensure that we preserve and protect human life here in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. And that's what we've done. I'm not dancing on anybody's heads when we do it. We're not poking fingers in people's eyes. We're not causing celebratory press conferences to be held. But we have indeed shut down 2/3 of the operating abortion clinics in the state by simply applying the law as it exists. And that has been good for Kentucky.
There was a piece of legislation that came up last year that would have ceased the state funding of Planned Parenthood. It's about $330,000 of the state portion that goes to Planned Parenthood here in Kentucky. That bill passed the Senate, did not pass the House.
It will this year.
Okay. So that's
I'm pretty confident that one will sail right through.
High priority for you. Okay.
Well, I will say this, Richard. It's going to be up to our legislators as to the degree of priority, and I hope people do understand that the governor doesn't set the policy as to what bill comes up when. It's the House and the Senate who are the ones who initiate bills. I can certainly encourage things, and I don't need to even encourage that. There's already multiple people wanting to sponsor a bill like that, so I know we have the votes. I know that, frankly, Republicans and Democrats alike would like to vote for a bill like that, and I think we'll see it happen.
Another social issue that you engaged on the campaign trail prior to your election was protecting the religious freedom rights, conscience rights of business owners, in particular of elected officials. And one of your first executive orders was to take Kentucky county clerks' names off of the marriage certificates so they wouldn't be put in the crosshairs of possibly violating their conscience. You ended up signing a bill into law that codified that was the protection of religious freedom and conscience rights. Do you expect any more legislation to come up this session to deal particularly with business owners to codify or to let me restate that, to shore up their religious freedom? I just read in the news earlier today about a couple in Minnesota, Governor, who have a videography company. And one of the laws on the books in Minnesota is to say that you cannot decline filming or participating in a same-sex wedding ceremony. Now, there have been previous bills here in Kentucky that have brought this up. They've not gotten past the State House. And I'm just wondering if that's something that's on your radar, or if you have any thoughts on that kind of potential legislation.
We are blessed in Kentucky to have one of the most comprehensive religious freedom bills that is on the books of any state. It was passed actually over the veto of my predecessor by the House and the Senate. And that included when we had a Democrat-controlled House. The people of Kentucky value our religious freedom. They value the ability of the First Amendment rights of somebody based on their faith to not be subjugated to the First Amendment rights of someone else. And so I think my job and the job of our current legislators is simply to enforce and uphold and defend the laws that are already on the books in this state. And so I don't anticipate, there's not really a need for new things. You don't see the issues that are being dealt with, like the one you described, happening here in Kentucky, and I don't think you will.
Very good, very good. I want to move on to some other societal/social issues that have been priorities here in Frankfort, issues that, quite frankly, have the Kentucky population has dealt with. I'm thinking of addiction, the heroin scourge in Kentucky. Let's talk about that. That you were allocated more money for that. There was legislation that went through to deal with that. Is more going to be done on the heroin issue?
Yes, it has to be. And it isn't just money. I mean, honestly, this is what people have to appreciate. There's no amount of government money that can fix this problem. There's no amount of programs to deal with the bottom end of the funnel if people keep falling into the top end of the funnel in increasing numbers. This is a cultural problem. It's a spiritual problem. It's an economic problem. This is what is leading to drug addiction. It's what's leading to crime in our inner cities. These things have got to be addressed at their root cause. And so these are things we're focused on. Our administration is working closely with other states to be at the front edge of, and some things we're doing independent. We're working with the Health and Human Services as it relates to even getting waivers within the Medicaid program, where we can use Medicaid dollars for the first time in innovative ways to deal with this opioid addiction specifically. So we are doing things, and will continue to focus on eliminating this scourge.
If you were to ask the churches, what I'm hearing, you mentioned spiritual problem, and of course you've taken the lead, you have gotten behind programs, innovative changes, you've allocated money to fight the scourge of heroin, but you mentioned the word spiritual. And if you had a request from churches or a wish that you could have to churches, what would it be? What could churches across Kentucky do to address that issue of addiction?
To step up and be bold in terms of their willingness to talk about it. Talk about it from the pulpit. Talk about it in their communities, in their churches. Talk about the fact that we have an obligation to truly be our brother's keeper, to love one another as we would want to be loved, to love one another as we would have our neighbors love ourselves. And that includes reaching out to not only the people that we don't know, but an amazing number of people that are in our own churches. The number of people who are affected by this drug problem, whose families go to church, and some of these individuals themselves who go to church. It is a much more systemic problem than people appreciate. We should stop pretending it doesn't exist, and we should deal with it head on, and we should do it in love.
That's good. That's good. A couple other issues. There was a backlog of sexual assault kits in Kentucky where there were sexual assault crimes. Yes. Evidence was collected, but there was a huge backlog that you inherited, and you'd allocated several $millions to untie that backlog. Another issue was the adoption and foster care. You're trying to improve the process and make it easier. The reason I'm talking about these two issues in the same sense, by the way, you could put in heroin there. These are social issues, a social crisis that's happening, and there's a connection between the two, and it would be the breakdown of family, if you will, breakdown of personal responsibility. But there's only so much government can do. You've taken the lead. You've done some good things on these. But again, what more, and maybe you've already answered it, but what more could churches do or community members do to address these things? I think, and where I'm getting to is I think people look to the government to solve everything. Yeah. You're the governor or you're the legislator, solve our problem for us. How do you address that?
Again, these communities have to resolve these things from within. The fundamental building block, the cornerstone of civilized society is the family unit, in a strong family unit. So back to what I would encourage pastors, step up and take ownership and encourage strong units. What can government do? Again, we did clean up the entire backlog of rape test kits. So that's been taken care of. We have included new methodologies for taking care of foster children. I want to make it easier to adopt. There's 8,000 children in foster care. We probably have 8,000 churches in Kentucky. It's shameful that there's any kids in foster care that couldn't have a good, constructive family with a mom and a dad who would love them unconditionally. That's all these kids want. So what can government do? Government can create an incentive for the types of behaviors that we know are good, to encourage strong family units and to make it easier for those strong family units to be part of the solution. That's the role of government.
That's great. That's great. Governor, we only have a few more minutes, and I want to pivot over to the topic of leadership. According to the latest Gallup poll, one half of Americans distrust government. The approval rating for Congress is very low. Some people have, quite frankly, have just dropped out of politics. They said, I'm not going to vote. I don't care about it. It doesn't make a difference. What do you say about that? The frustration, the cynicism that's there. And I'm sure you've seen it on the campaign trail. You probably see it on a regular basis.
But I'll tell you, we've seen a little bit of a backlash against that apathy, as was evidenced in our race in 2015, where people that were not expected to come out came out in great numbers. We did win by over 9% because of the fact that people just have had enough. We saw the same thing, too, at the national level. What I would say to those who are jaded, who are cynical, who think it doesn't matter, it does matter. We won our primary, as you noted at the beginning of this discussion, by a fraction, some thousandths of 1%. I mean, it was less than one vote per county. People's votes do matter. And the privilege that we have to vote, 1.5 million Americans giving their lives in uniform so that we have this luxury. Today, as we're filming this, is Pearl Harbor Day. I know it'll be sometime afterwards that this airs. But this is a significant day in our history where so much has been given for us. It is our right, it's our privilege, but it's our obligation, frankly, to get out and vote. And I would encourage people, do not become apathetic, because cultures and civilizations crumble from within due to apathy, not because of external force. We cannot allow the candle to go out on our watch.
What I'm hearing from you is something that I hear Dr. Al Mohler share. It's the term convictional leadership. Understanding what we have inherited, what we believe, and then how to move on. Do we need more convictional leaders in office?
We do, but frankly, people need to be informed to have convictions. And so it's incumbent upon those in leadership now, those who are in pulpits, those who are parents, those who are teachers, those who are in positions of influence as employers. It's our responsibility to pour into those who are beneath us in some form or fashion, as people who come to us for advice, for whom we have responsibility for the next generations. Because if we don't understand the history, we're destined to repeat the worst elements of where we come from. And so in order to be a leader of conviction, you've got to be informed. You need to be able to be an apologist for what you believe, not just emotionally, I'm for X, but be able to defend it, to be an apologist for it so that when you're challenged, you can articulate better than the challenger why you believe what you believe and make believers of others. That's what this looks like. Leadership comes by example.
That's great. Governor, we've got just a minute. I want to thank you right now for, again, taking time out of your very busy schedule. If you have in just a few seconds, what would you say? What is a wish that you have for Kentuckians in the upcoming new year? If there's a word or a wish or a desire that you'd have for the average Kentuckian who might be tuning in right now, what would you say to them?
It doesn't bother me one lick to say that my prayer for Kentucky is this, and I'm very specific about it. I pray that the people of Kentucky will have the discernment and the wisdom to know the difference between what is the right thing to do and what is the wrong thing. But a secondary prayer that I have is that they'll have the courage and the conviction to do what is right. So often we know what's right, and it's hard to do the right thing. And my prayer for the people of Kentucky is they will have the wisdom to know the right thing and the courage to do it. And I believe they will. I think we're seeing evidence of it. I continue to pray for that, and the same thing for my children. And I know that bright days are ahead of us here in the Commonwealth. I am convinced that God will continue to shed His grace on our old Kentucky home. I truly believe it.
Wonderful. On that note, Governor Bevin, thank you so much for having us.
You're welcome.
It's good to be with you.
Thank you.